that the living church in this country has been taken very seriously. It's a young branch of the profession. And even today, not all of the major ecclesiastical sites, such as our great cathedrals up and down the country, have an archaeological presence. However, Wells Cathedral in Somerset, outstanding as the first truly Gothic building in Europe, was one of the first to appoint an archaeologist as an advisor. He's Dr. Warwick Rodwell, and is with me now on the roof of the main tower here at Wells Cathedral. How does this cathedral, marvellous as it is, lay claim to being the first Gothic cathedral in Europe?
Well, it is the first building to adopt all the Gothic devices of architecture wholesale. There isn't a trace anywhere in this building of the old Norman style, of the circular columns, the round arches, and the massiveness that we associate with Norman or Romanesque architecture. And this is the building where the architect, whoever he was, around about 1180, threw out all this old style and went entirely in for the light and airy style of the early English.
So it was very much a prototype?
It was, yes. The trials had been made at one or two other places, such as the Canterbury Choir about 1176, but here Wells took the bull by the horns and developed the Gothic in its most exquisite and complete form.
As we look over the parapet here and down to the city itself, one can't help being impressed by how neat and compact it all is. It's a dinky little city, this, isn't it, Wells?
Yes, it's the smallest city in England, and it is all laid out very compactly and neatly around the ecclesiastical buildings, which are the raison d'etre for the city's existence.
And of course it must have started from those wells there we can see on our left.
Yes, those are the wells from which the city takes its name, where the water bubbles up through the ground, and which originally ran in a natural stream valley through in front of us here, south of the cathedral, straight down the marketplace.
Does the water still run down the marketplace today?
Yes, it does. Not in a natural stream, but it is canalised, and it still runs down the streets and comes out through the fountain in the marketplace. Now, you would have thought that the cathedral might have followed that natural alignment, but it doesn't. The cathedral is to the north of the stream, and it's twisted round quite some considerable degree. And it used to be thought, of course, that there was an Anglo-Saxon cathedral underneath the present building. But as a result of the excavations at the end of last century and our work here now, it is clear that the Anglo-Saxon cathedral lay between us and the stream, in other words, to the south of the present cathedral, and on a very different alignment.
And they're the excavations that we're looking into now.
That's
just
right.
Below us.
And you can see there how the walls diverge from the present cathedral, and indeed there is a 12-degree difference between the present alignment and the line of the Saxon and Norman buildings down there. Now, the arrangement was, it seems, one of those pieces of Anglo-Saxon linear planning, whereby we start at the east end with the Holy Well, and then we have, running westwards, the Saxon Cathedral, with its Lady Chapel at the east end of it. The cathedral ran under what is now the present area of the cloisters, and came to a forecourt, or area in front of the west end, which was known as the atrium. And that atrium, which is now occupied by houses and gardens, gave onto the marketplace. And then the marketplace ran further west, and there was the market cross. And from the end of the marketplace ran the High Street. And right at the far end of the High Street is the Saxon parish church called St. Cuthbert's.
But when did Wells begin?
Well, we don't really know. We have found in the recent excavations prehistoric flints and Roman finds, so that there certainly was ancient occupation here beside the wells. But our first solid knowledge comes with the foundation of the ecclesiastical establishment, probably founded in about 705 as a minster church, and then later becoming the cathedral in 909. And it is from that sort of period, the 10th century onwards, that we have the remains before us in the excavation here.
I imagine that all this architectural richness and history has been well documented. There are some excellent libraries here in Wales, aren't there, particularly in the cathedral. But how much archaeological work has been done?
Very little archaeological work, and apart from the rather brief excavations of 1894 here at the cathedral, almost nothing has been investigated, and so the field is wide open, and that is why it is so exciting for us to be excavating down here now, as you see below us, looking at the early levels of wells where no one has looked before.
We've come down from the tower now, down through the roof of the south transept, and along the cloisters, and out into this area where the excavations are now going on. These walls here were part of the first Saxon church, were they?
Yes, that's right. We have here the north and south walls of the easternmost extremity of the Anglo-Saxon church, or at least a chapel on the end of it. And this is very probably the Lady Chapel, which was restored and endowed by Bishop Giso. He was the last Anglo-Saxon bishop, a man from Lorraine who spanned the Norman conquest, and we know that he did works to the eastern end of the Saxon cathedral.
Like most other churches in most times, this has been a growing church, and if we move away from this particular part of the site and out into this area of the excavation, we can see where some of the buildings developed.
Well, this is the site of the Lady Chapel as it developed. You must imagine that the majority of the Anglo-Saxon cathedral was demolished by 1200, but Giso's Lady Chapel stayed on, it seems, and it is here that we have the growth of that Lady Chapel into a much larger and more complex structure, surviving beside the cloister here in a rather anomalous position.
Now, you say it's anomalous. Why?
Well, it would have projected from the side of the cloister at this curious angle for a start, 12 degrees off the alignment of the cloister. It is in a place where you would have expected the chapter house to have been built, and indeed one might suspect that the cloister, when it was being designed, was intended to have the chapter house here, but it didn't. They kept the old Lady Chapel instead, and that must have been for a very important reason.
What reason do you think that is?
Well, I think it served, if only temporarily, as the mausoleum of the Anglo-Saxon bishops, and that their tombs and monuments were perhaps kept here in this Lady Chapel until the interior of the new cathedral was ready to receive them with true dignity. Well, if we climb up over these foundations and go into the Lady Chapel, we can see what survives of the medieval building. Now, it's very much damaged, but you can imagine it as having a long, narrow east end and a pair of aisles, one on the north and one on the south. Now, these aisles were added to the Anglo-Saxon and Norman buildings to make it larger, at a time when its importance was ever growing. Because you must remember here that this was a very important building right through the early part of the Middle Ages. Ordinations were held here, the consistory court met here, and a number of important chantries were established here, including some by bishops. And thus, this chapel, in the 13th century in particular, attracted a number of very important burials, some of which, as you can see, we are beginning to excavate here in front of us.
Terry Pearson, you're assistant site director here, and you're chipping away at a piece of masonry there. It looks like the top of a tomb you're working on, is that right?
Yes, that's right. This tomb cyst is completely mortared together. All the large slabs on the top of it are completely sealed with mortar, and we're trying to break the cracks or the breaks between the stones so that we can get the top up.
Now, once you've got rid of that last bit of mortar, it's then a matter of what?
Literally heaving the stones out, which is quite a job.
You'll need one or two people, and my help as well, perhaps.
Yes, indeed.
Right, well, I'll stand back and watch you and be on hand if necessary.
This must be a canon's burial, because we can see here where the corner has come off this slab that there is a little niche in the side, and in that niche are the remains of a pewter chalice. Now that implies a priest's burial without any shadow of doubt.
Dr. Juliet Rogers, who is a paleopathologist, is standing by watching the opening of this tomb because you're interested in the condition of the skeleton once it's fully revealed.
Yes, well, the middle of the skeleton seems to be in reasonably good condition, but the top and the feet are rotted through damp, probably, in the same condition as the chalice. the lower 10 vertebrae are still present, I can see. One of them, the second lumbar vertebrae, seems to have be partially collapsed, possibly through some injury previously. It does seem to be particularly rotten up the top here, because the mandible has completely rotted and we've just got a pile of loose teeth, and all the upper vertebrae have also rotted and disappeared, and the face has gone too.
What sort of a profile can you build up of the way of life of these people?
Disease leaves little trace on bone. Only very few diseases leave much trace on bone. So one is restricted to taking measurements of populations as a whole, so that you can get an idea of the general stature, the general age distribution, and age at death in the whole population. So each individual doesn't give you very much, but the whole population is the better. Have a look at the population as a whole.
Can you get some idea of their diet from a study of
no, not
graveyards
diet
like
in
this?
particular, but the state of nutrition, perhaps. It's very difficult to build up a complete picture from bones alone, but it helps to add to all the other evidence that archaeologists get.
The hut where all the finds are kept is here on the edge of the excavation, where the supervisor is working away with various boxes of bits of pottery and bone and goodness only knows what. Sarah Adams, what, for example, is in this box here?
Well, here we have a large amount of bone again. I'm sure you're aware that most of the finds that have been coming up from the site are bone. And floor tiles, medieval floor tiles.
Have you got pottery as well?
Yes, we've got medieval pottery, and earlier on we had quite a large amount of post-medieval pottery, but now it's mostly medieval, and a few sheds of Roman pottery.
Mm-hmm. Now, these are pieces of masonry here.
Yes, we've got one or two nice fragments of carved statuary.
Yes, let's have a look at this one.
This one's what you would call an Agnus Dei, and it's the Lamb of God with a cross, and around it is a circle with gold. It could be lettering, or it could just be gold paint.
And pieces like this. Here's a piece of sculpture.
Yes.
Obviously attached to a building in days gone by.
Yes, it's a rather nice head, that. Actually, it's one of the smaller ones. We found several pieces of statuary, bits of arms and people's bodies, and one or two heads. Some of them with gilding still on them. One of the nicest bits we've had, actually, is this head of the bishop, who, on his crozier, I don't know if you can see it actually, but there are some rather nice bits of gilding around the edges still. He's, I'm afraid, had a slight accident in being thrown through one of the windows.
Kirsty Rodwell, you're co-directing this site, and this piece of statuary came through one of the stained glass windows.
It looks very much like this. It was found very close to the south transept, just as a piece lying in the earth, and round and about it a lot of bits of stained glass window, and a number of the smaller fragments came from there as well.
That's rather careless of somebody, isn't it? Through the stained glass window.
It looks like a piece of iconoclasm. The only time when this seems to have taken place at Wells was during the 1685 Monmouth Rebellion, when we know that troops were stabled here overnight. They kept their horses inside the cathedral and pulled down a number of the statues from the west front, and it looks as though they indulged in a bit of vandalism while they were at it, pulled bits off monuments and threw it through the south transept windows.
And you've been able to deduce this because of the position where these things are lying?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.